Hello everyone, today we are going to talk about a horror thriller film called Don't Move from 2024. The film begins with a spectacular shot of a steep cliff, after which the story moves to the bedroom of a married couple, where Iris suffers from insomnia. She gets out of bed, takes a red toy boat and goes downstairs to the first floor. There she takes out a small penknife, leaves her phone on the charger and goes outside with her things. Getting into her car, she leaves her comfortable suburban neighborhood in the early morning. Her path leads to a parking lot. At the entrance to a forest park, she follows the tourist route to a high cliff. There near a tree is a makeshift memorial to her young son who died after falling from this cliff. Iris scratches the first letter of his name on the tree trunk with a knife, adding it to her initials and those of her husband. She then approaches the edge of the cliff, contemplating taking the fatal step down, but is distracted by a strange man named Richard. Ignoring common courtesy, he starts a conversation with Iris. To distract her, Richard tells her about a car accident he had when he was young. His car crashed into a wall and his girlfriend Chloe died. Before the accident they were fighting and he remembered his last words to her. After the accident he was on life support for 2 months. The stranger's revelation prompts Iris to tell him about her son's death. After that, Richard leaves her alone with her thoughts and descends the mountain. Iris no longer wants to jump down from the cliff and catches up with Richard. Together they return to the parking lot, where it turns out that Richard has parked his car too close for Iris to get into her car. Instead of waiting for him to drive away, she tries to squeeze into the tight gap. At this point Richard approaches her with an umbrella, and tells her that it is about to rain. He insidiously shocks her with an electric charge, then ties her up and pushes her into the back seat of the car. Iris regains consciousness and tries to use her smartwatch to call for help. Richard tells her that he is a maniac and a serial killer, and that the memorial left on the cliff only drew his attention to her son. However, Iris still wants to try to escape. She pulls out a folding knife and starts cutting the plastic ties, while distracting Richard by talking about Chloe and her son. When she manages to free her hands, she attacks Richard. He fights back, but eventually the car loses control and crashes into a tree. Iris tries to strangle him with the seatbelt, but Richard throws the seat back, kicking him in the face. Iris grabs the knife that has fallen out and threatens him again, until they both fall out of the car on opposite sides. She cuts the ties on her legs and calls for help. When Richard gets up, he realizes that he hadn't checked her pockets for anything else. However, he had a backup plan. He had injected her with a powerful drug in advance, which would cause complete paralysis in 20 minutes. Richard explains to her the sequence of the drug's action. First, the vocal cords will fail, then the fine motor skills of the hands will be impaired, preventing her from holding a knife, then the legs and other muscles will fail. Iris runs off into the woods losing her knife, and Richard slowly follows her, limping because of the leg he injured in the accident. Iris runs through the thicket of trees hoping to find a safe place to hide. She repeats the finger exercise she showed her son when she was teaching him to count. Each time she does it her fingers are getting worse. Her legs begin to give out, but she still moves through the forest, while Richard slowly but inexorably follows, losing the rest of her strength and balance. Iris eventually climbs into a crevice under the roots of a tree. Richard looks around the neighborhood, not noticing the victim, and continues on. Unfortunately, Iris was sitting next to an anthill and the drug did not completely disable her nerve receptors. She makes an involuntary sound from the ant bites, which attracts the attention of the pursuer. Fortunately, Iris manages to get to the river. Downstream there are stormy rapids that cause her to almost drown, but she manages to swim to a log and get to the shore. Breathing in greedily and feeling her body refuse to obey, she lies in the grass, able to move only her eyes. Farmer Bill is mowing the grass nearby and notices the girl, carefully turning her over. He asks leading questions and responds to the strang blanks, realizing that she is injured, and offers to call the rescuers. Iris has to lie down in the grass for a while, waiting for the farmer to figure out how to get her to safety. Before he can do so, he hears a knock at the door. Through Iris's blinking, the farmer realizes that something is wrong. Richard is standing outside the door, saying that he has had an accident and is looking for his missing injured wife. The farmer closes the door, promising to call for help, but Richard follows, pretending to be sick. Richard looks around the room, not noticing the paralyzed Iris. Sitting down on the couch, he ignores the farmer's request to leave and suddenly begins to sob. He tells a heartbreaking story about his wife who had an accident but survived. He says that if the police are called, she will be sent to a psychiatric hospital, and a loving husband cannot allow this. According to him, during the seizure she goes into a medical stupor and cannot move or speak. At this time Iris is lying on the floor behind the sofa, and she is very afraid. Nevertheless, Richard's sincerity convinces the farmer, and he is ready to admit that he found his wife on the shore. At this point Richard's phone, which he supposedly lost in the woods, rings in his pocket. The farmer realizes that the guest is deceiving him and asks him to leave, realizing that he's onto him. Richard changes his tone and asks directly where the girl is. The farmer replies that she's in the barn and asks the stranger to take her and leave. Before he checks it out, Richard asks him to give him the phone so that Bill doesn't call the police. The farmer hands over the phone but immediately attacks Richard, pushing him into a closet. While Richard gets out, the farmer dials the emergency number to report the attack. Richard gets out of the rubble and a fight breaks out between them. The experienced farmer prevails over Richard, but Richard finds a knife on the floor and fights back. The farmer falls on Richard and Richard stabs him several times. Realizing that the police are on their way, Richard searches the barn, not finding Iris there. He douses the house with gasoline. Iris sees all this and tries to signal by tapping her finger on the floor, but Richard thinks he just heard the sound. Taking the farmer's car keys and his shirt, Richard sets the house on fire. Sitting in the car, he sees the blind swaying. Returning to the house in flames, Richard finds the woman and carries her out, putting her in the passenger seat. Richard drives away from the crime scene. On the way, he confesses that he is the first person he has killed because of her. Because all of his previous victims were women. Richard then receives a call from his daughter to say that they are coming to his cottage for the weekend. Being a model family man, Richard is upset that he won't be able to enjoy killing Iris. They stop at a gas station past which firefighters and an ambulance are rushing to the black column of smoke at the scene of the fire. Richard, putting a cap on his captive, is forced to go to the cash register to pay for gasoline. In his absence, Iris manages to unbuckle her seatbelt with difficulty. She falls headfirst onto the side window. Breathing heavily outside, a boy and his mother notice her, but do not have time to do anything. Richard returns to the scene of the accident, where the wrecked car remains, and pulls the ties and a syringe with a banned drug out of the trunk to avoid leaving any traces of the crime. He also changes into clean clothes without blood stains. While Richard is busy, Iris checks the sensitivity of his arm, and it slowly recovers. At this time, a police car pulls up behind them. The officer has received a tip from concerned witnesses at the gas station about a pickup truck with a strange passenger. He wants to check if everything is okay. Richard tells him that his wife has gone into a binge because of depression over the death of her son, and now he wants to help her. When asked how he got the wound on his forehead, Richard doesn't know what to say. At this point, Iris manages to open the window a little. Noticing this, the policeman wants to talk to her to make sure for himself. Iris realizes that she can already speak a little and whispers, "Help me." The officer notices the ties and the syringe. He reaches for his gun, but Richard hits him in the head with the cable, killing the officer. Richard puts his body in the car, pours gasoline on it and sets it on fire. Taking his service pistol, Richard drives the woman down the road. Iris regains consciousness and starts talking to him. She recalls the story of the accident and Chloe's death, suspecting that Richard had gone mad and become a serial killer. During the conversation, it turns out that Chloe died after the accident. Wounded, Richard watched her die. The last thing he said to her was "thank you." Her death inspired Richard to love his family in general and his daughter in particular. She said that if he was caught, he would be imprisoned and never see his daughter again. But since she doesn't know his real name, he can let her go and return home. However, Richard decides not to risk so much for a woman. Richard takes the captive woman to the shores of the lake. Opening the lock, he drives up to a pier with a boat. As soon as he stops, Iris presses a hidden syringe with a paralyzing drug into his leg, but she no longer has the strength to finish the job. Richard says that the bursts of energy are uneven, and then cynically pulls out the syringe and sprays the contents on Iris. He then pulls her dead son's red boat out of his pocket, deciding not to be a total beast. He bends down to fulfill Iris's request, seizing the moment. Iris pulls out a knife and stabs the criminal. Richard first pulls out his knife and then his gun, but Iris rocks the boat, causing him to lose his balance, drop his weapon and fall overboard. But he is still alive and tries to climb back in. Iris goes to pick up the gun and shoots him. Richard swims away again and bullet holes appear in the side. Water gradually floods the boat and Iris is not yet healthy enough to swim. She lies in the water while the wounded Richard swims to the shore. As the water rises to Iris's face, she holds her breath, trying to delay the inevitable soon. The boat sinks with her, leaving only the toy boat bobbing on the waves. But soon Iris emerges from the water and swims to the pier. She sees a wounded Richard coming ashore nearby. Iris approaches him, but at the same time realizes that she must value life. Iris leaves him alive while he bleeds to death. Why did she do that? I don't know. If you have watched the video so far, you should know that I am happy to have viewers like you. Thank you for watching to the end. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.